Okay, you know why you're here, I know why I'm here. Let's talk about this animation that I did. This is my guy, Jerry Runs a Lot. He's a character in my new short film, which has a trailer out right now, but this time, he's doing a little dance. And so I'm gonna talk about 10 tips that I learned while doing this animation. So tip number 1 is to think of an idea with appeal. So that means try to think of a premise that has a certain grab to it. You can just follow trends, or you can try and make something new. Either option works. What I like to do is I like to follow a trend but add my little spin to it. Or you can do something unique that is special to you. So in this case, the unique part is that it's my character, but the sort of trend part is that it's a dance. And then I decided to just add a little bit more flavor by adding a sort of 80s twist to it. So it's got the 80s music, and it's got the 80s dances and the 80s costume. Tip 2 is to gather reference. Before you even start animating or drawing anything, you need to have a macro view on this animation as a whole. What is the final product gonna look like? So I needed to gather reference. So I knew that I wanted to have these large, extravagant poses that my character, Jerry, would jump between to the beat of the music. And I also wanted him to be very melodramatic, because that sort of worked with his personality. So I thought the best way to do that was to look up Michael Jackson videos. There's some iconic poses that he did, like especially the Michael Jackson lean and the hip thrust. Those are some specific callbacks that I did. And then I also looked at just general 80s dance videos, and also I looked up specific costumes for 80s disco, which there were some leotards, and there were some wristbands and leg warmers as well. Tip 3 is to thumbnail quickly. I'll put up on the screen my thumbnails. I tried to get my thumbnails done as soon as possible. I think doing all of the thumbnails took me 1 to 2 days. I think it took me 2 days. And the reason why you want to get them down quickly is because these are not going to be your finalized drawings. Thumbnails are just like brain fart. You need to get them out quickly. You need to get all your ideas out quickly before you spend too much time thinking about them, and then boom, they're you forgot about them. Because in 18 seconds, there's a lot of poses that this character went through. So I had to think of a bunch of different poses and try not to forget them while I was drawing them. So I went boom, 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 quick drawings. And then I did a couple in-betweens, a couple breakdowns, just to smooth out the movements a little bit, but I made sure to get those big exaggerated poses in as soon as possible. The next tip is to not forget expressions. So right after I finished doing the poses, I went straight ahead to doing the expressions on each of the poses. Now I also had the expressions in mind when doing these thumbnails, but I decided to do the expressions as a pass afterwards because I didn't want to forget all the poses for my thumbnails. Make sure to have a wide range of expressions throughout your animation. You don't just want to have a smile the whole time, or, just like a closed mouth the whole time. You want to have a wide range of expressions because that's where your character's personality is going to show through. There are generally 2 ways a character can show emotion. One way is through gesture or posing, and the other way is through facial expression. The next tip is to use a small brush. So this is kind of a weird one, right? Use a small brush, why? Well, I prefer to use a small brush when doing roughs and tie downs. For thumbnails, when you're getting something down quickly, like a quick pose, sure, some people like to use a larger brush. It makes them feel a bit more comfortable putting down these large strokes. Yeah, if that works for you, then yeah, go ahead. But after you do your thumbnails and you go into your roughs, you really need to understand the anatomy and the shapes that make up your character. You don't need to understand all of the details yet, but you need to understand the underlying structure of your character. And it's hard for you to understand the structure of your character if you can't understand the lines. So I generally like to go with a 5 pixel large line at the largest. Of course, with pen pressure it gets a bit under 5 pixels. As an animator, you're trying to make your future animating experience as easy as possible. So you don't want to hide behind the thick lines. You want to make everything as clear as possible for the next steps. So after I did my roughs, I moved on to tie downs. And I actually split up my tie downs into 2 layers. One layer was for the expressions and the costuming, and then the other layer was for the secondary action, which is my next tip, to use secondary action. As you can see in my rough pass, the blue lines are in the secondary action layer. Secondary action is just, it's one of the principles of animation, and I think for a dance animation it's really good to have, because with this type of animation, where the character is jumping from static pose to static pose, it's always good to have just a little bit of follow through when the character is staying still. It adds just a little bit of extra movement without adding too many frames of animation. So the next tip is to choose interesting breakdown poses. So when I'm doing my breakdowns are the frames in between your key poses. And when people hear that, they hear in between, they just think, oh, okay, I'm just gonna draw the character exactly at the halfway point between the 2 frames. No, you don't do that, because that is boring. Breakdowns should be interesting. Breakdowns should be as interesting as a key pose. So instead of having a character move linearly in a straight line, anchor the breakdown at an arc. Maybe you can change the character's facial expression in their breakdown. Maybe you could have them blink, or you could have their mouth open. Make sure that the parts of your character which are following secondary action have a little bit of delay in their breakdown. Maybe in this movement, is the character leading with their torso? Is the character leading with their pelvis? Or are they leading with their ribcage? Or are they leading with their head? You got to figure these out in the breakdown. And then after you finish the breakdown, you can just go into zombie mode and do the in-betweens. My 7th tip is to use the pen tool for line art. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. When I'm doing my roughs, I like to use the brush tool because it gives me a lot of freedom with erasing and I don't have to worry about being clean. But when I'm in cleanup mode, I decided to use the pen tool. And the pen tool has a lot of features that can help you when doing smooth lines. There's a mending tool where the program will automatically join the lines together so there's no gaps. You can also turn on the stabilizer for the pen tool, which gives you smoother strokes. And also you can go into the cleanup window and close the gaps. So the pen tool is a very useful tool for cleanup. My next tip is to use simple character designs. This was something that I learned during the cleanup phase. Yeah, this character is not very simple. He's very complex. He has a very complex character design. He's got a lot of anatomy to begin with, even though it's very exaggerated. He's got secondary action with all of his different tufts of hair. And then he's also got different textures in his costuming. He's got skin tight stuff with his leotard. He's got poofy, fluffy stuff with his wristbands and leg warmers. And then he's also got wavy, flat fabric with his crop top. So, very complex character design. And that meant that cleanup was very long and very arduous. Just remember, when you're designing a character, you're gonna have to draw every single one of those lines in the character design for every single frame. So the work that you put into your character design is gonna be exponentially larger in your animation process. So if I were to do this animation again, I would make my character design a lot simpler. And finally, the last tip is to not lose motivation, because animation is a long process and it's gonna take a while to finish. This animation in total took me around 4 weeks to do, and most of that time was cleanup. It took me about 2 days to do the thumbnails, then it took me about 1 week to do the roughs, then another week to finish the tie downs, and then 2 more weeks to do the cleanup. And then after that, it took me about just one day to do the coloring and another day to do the compositing. So a majority of my time was during cleanup, and that is where your morale is going to be the lowest. Cleanup is very long and very monotonous, and you just got to be aware that you're going to spend a lot of time in cleanup. So don't lose motivation at that point. Just keep going, because it's gonna pay off at the end. So yeah, those are my 10 tips, and I hope you guys enjoyed this animation. Don't forget to like and subscribe and look at my other videos. Bye!